To welcome you to the Image Center Wellness Program for the month of September. For this month of September, our topic is voting rights, a panel discussion, know your rights this election season. If you have any questions, we ask that you please hold them to the end of the presentation for our Q&A section. And also, I forgot to mention that the Image Center is a center for independent living for citizens in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Harford County. And with that, Chris, you can take it away.
All right, thank you, Kiana. And that was Kiana Mayo, a social support specialist with our Image Public Health Program. And also, what do you do with Out and About? I'm sorry, I always forget.
Outreach and support specialist.
Yeah, outreach and support specialist with our Out and About program. And my name is Chris Nusbaum, and I also work on our public health program as a social support specialist, as well as serving as the project coordinator for our Bridges Technical Assistance Center. And if you want to know about all of the various and sundry programs that we offer at the Image Center, you can visit our website at imagemd.org. All right, so let's get started to talk with us about our rights as people with disabilities in this election season and the accessible options available to us as voters as we go to the polls in November. We have two people who are specializing in this issue and working on it at two of our prominent advocacy organizations at the national and state level. So our first panelist is a disability rights attorney and somebody who is working particularly around this issue, Braden Stinar. And I'll go ahead and read his bio. Mr. Stinar is a recent graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law and was admitted to the bar in the state of Maryland in 2023. Throughout law school, Mr. Stinar worked diligently as both a clerk and Rule 19 student attorney with the Maryland Office of the Public Defender and has continued his passion for community-driven legal advocacy as a voting rights attorney with Maryland's Protection and Advocacy Agency, Disability Rights Maryland. Presently, Mr. Stinar's work focuses on removing both barriers to employment and the ballot box for Maryland's disability community. So with that, let's turn it over to somebody who's doing a lot in the legal arena and knows the ins and outs of legal advocacy in many ways from Disability Rights Maryland. Here's Braden Stinar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris, so much for that warm introduction. It's definitely a privilege and an honor to be here with you all and to have this recording go out on YouTube. I'm super excited for that as well. So thanks so much for having me. Like Chris said, I am a recent law school graduate, but I have been, contributing in this space and in the voting rights work for a few years now. And I'm really excited to, take on this role at Disability Rights Maryland and just continue that work and that advocacy on a more statewide basis. So I wanted to start off my piece of the panel today to really just give a brief overview of how we got to where we are concerning the rights for individuals to vote with disabilities. And then I'm going to move to highlight the importance of coming together as a unified voice with our votes to create collective change. And finally, wrap things up by briefly touching on the supports that are in place to assist with individuals who have a disability to gain access to the polls and make their voices heard. So that being said, I want to, take us through a brief timeline of voter suffrage to show where we've come from and how we got to where we are today. So I'm sure, the majority of you all here today are aware that, obviously our nation was founded in 1776, but that comes with a caveat. So for the first 30 years of our nation's existence, only white property owning men had the power to vote. And from 1800 to 1860, the property owning requirement began to fade, and free Black men in some states like Wisconsin and Iowa gained voting rights. Now, the caveat to that change, however, came with significant new barriers intended to prevent these people of color from exercising their right. So more states continued the trend of granting Black men access to polls, but created more significant barriers like poll taxes, literacy taxes, voting, voter rights codes, and some of the other, just to name a few. So in 1920, women were granted access to the polls, and 40 years later, in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. And finally, 20 years after that, in 1982, they extended the Voting Rights Act to include removing barriers to the polls for individuals with disabilities. Now, since the expansion of the Voting Rights Act in 1982, we then saw the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002. Now, this is the most important, I would argue, voting rights act in the history of the United States when it comes to individuals with disabilities, because this required all state and local polling sites to have accessible ballot marking devices on hand for use by, everyone, but also, more importantly, individuals with disabilities who require the use of those machines to make their voices heard. So given this timeline, sort of displays some slow burning change, we're forced to acknowledge that although, advocacy for supporting all Americans to vote has been there since our nation's inception, the disability community being taken into consideration is fairly a new concept. So that being said, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done to remove barriers to the polls for individuals with disabilities. Poll locations still struggle to maintain accessible entrances and voting methods for individuals with mobility impairments, and individuals residing in long-term and short-term care facilities are still not provided the proper information of how to vote and how they can access the polls. And more in particular, I myself in my community-driven efforts have heard constantly from community members about how poll workers are still not aware of the proper regulations and requirements for how to support voters who have disabilities or other certain accessibility needs. So all that being said, I think it brings us, to the importance of our vote. And I think to appreciate sort of how important the vote of the disability community is, you have to appreciate and take into consideration how large the disability community is. So in the state of Maryland in 2024, the CDC found that 1 in 4 Marylanders have a disability. That's 25% of the Maryland population are community members with disabilities. That's an enormous voter block and historically ignored by politicians and electeds alike, just waiting to be motivated and given a reason to engage in the voting process. Or more likely waiting to understand, what role they can play and how they can access the polls. So at this point, I want to highlight the Not About Us, Without Us movement, just to show how the power of collective voice can cause change, in our world. So the disability community in South Africa banded together to drive the anti-apartheid activist movement, and through that movement, birthed the Not About Us, Without Us campaign. So disabled members of the South African anti-apartheid movement founded this campaign. They took this statement, this highlighted role, and they really drove and went with it, ran with it. And this movement is intended to do exactly as it says. It's intended to allow the disability community's voices to lead the charge in determining how we shape our world moving forward. This movement is so incredibly important because it reinforces the role of people with disabilities as allies and partners who share the road towards inclusion and equality. It matters because it unites the disability community with all other marginalized and oppressed individuals and groups who are also demanding a more than deserved seat at the table. And more importantly, people with disabilities have lifetimes worth of experience navigating the United States systems of healthcare, social services, and employment, all of which have been historically slow to evolve and meet the needs of our community members. Now, politicians should be looking to individuals with disabilities for how to determine what a future for America should look like. Because like I said, there's no better population better served to speak to the needs of Americans on the systems like those prior mentioned. So now that, a good basis of the groundwork has been laid and we have a fairly, concrete understanding of how we got to where we are today, I want to briefly touch on some of the supports that are out there for individuals with disabilities to access the polls. So in Maryland, you can register to vote in person, by mail, online, or on the same day that you actually go to actively, take part in the voting process. Now, registered voters can vote on election day, they can vote prior to election day at early voting centers, or they can vote by mail-in ballot. And early voting and mail-in ballots are a great way for individuals with disabilities to avoid lines at the polls or other accessibility barriers that may arise when trying to vote in person. And I highly recommend in all of my, outreach efforts that individuals with disabilities, if they feel comfortable voting in person, to go vote in person. But if there's any ever confusion or any concern about any barriers that might arise, I always, have them fill out the mail-in ballot request form and request that mail-in ballot. That way they can, vote from their place of comfort, their home, their community center, whatever place feels more comfortable for them. So another thing I wanted to touch on briefly is some of the more supports that are available for individuals with disabilities to vote. So when voting either in person or through a mail-in ballot, individuals with a disability are allowed a support person to assist with all aspects of the voting process. So this includes being in the ballot box with you if you so desired, and that support individual can assist with reading the ballot, using voting equipment, providing transportation, learning about candidate issues, and filling out the ballot itself. The support person can be anyone of the voter's choice, as long as that individual has not themselves been convicted of election-related crimes, is your employer, is a poll watcher, or an agent of your union. So really that person of choice can take the form of whomever that individual desires, whomever that individual feels more comfortable or most comfortable to provide support in that setting. So that could be a friend, a family member, a poll worker that isn't a poll watcher, medical support staff, or really, like I said, anyone that you feel comfortable making or helping you make that decision and helping you work through that ballot with you. So now that I've touched briefly on the concept of having assistance from the person of your choice, I'd also like to highlight the rights of individuals with a disability who are residing in long-term or short-term care facilities, or also under guardianship. So in 2020, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services issued a memorandum to nursing facilities and other facilities who receive Medicare or Medicaid funding, reiterating the requirement of these facilities to support residents in exercising their rights to vote. In other words, these facilities must help and support residents to vote, and this includes assistance with registration, request of a mail-in ballot, return of the mail-in ballot, or even transportation to and from the individual's polling location. So, and as additionally, like I previously mentioned, residents are also allowed support people to help and assist with the voting process. So this is a big thing that's come up in my recent outreach events in this, election cycle, has been reiterating to short-term and long-term care facility workers of their requirement to provide support for individuals in those facilities to access the polls. There's a lot of confusion around this requirement and a lot of confusion around, what sort of support that care facilities are intended and required to provide. So it's been imperative of me in my work this past, election cycle, and as we continue on to November, to reiterate to long-term and short-term care facilities that there is a requirement for them to provide support for prospective voters or individuals who are even looking to just gain a bit more information about the voting process. Now, all of that being said, I want to highlight, what to do if something goes wrong. So Disability Rights Maryland maintains a 24/7 election hotline for community members to call for support and to report any barriers that might arise at the polls. And further, on election day itself, Disability Rights Maryland will be working in collaboration with the ACLU of Maryland, the League of Women Voters, and Common Cause Maryland to host a boiler room meeting all day while we field calls from community members and provide immediate support. And additionally, voters can report any problems that might arise directly to the State Board of Elections by filing a complaint and moving through their, proper complaint process. Now, more details about that process can be found on the State Board of Election website, Or if you want more details of that process more personally, you can feel free to reach out to myself, and I can provide you with some, additional support for how to move through that complaint process. I realize I skipped the guardianship piece, so I'll move back to that real quickly because it is a big concern right now, and another thing that I've been hearing constantly from community members in our outreach events so far. So there is some confusion in the state of Maryland when it comes to who can vote under guardianship and the impact that guardianship may have on an individual's voting rights. So I think it's very important to provide some clarity here. Being under guardianship does not immediately strip you of your voting rights. You retain your voting rights under guardianship unless there has been a separate proceeding in which a court of law has found that you as an individual are not competent to understand the voting process. That is separate than the guardianship proceeding. That is separate from a court's, acknowledgement that you don't have the capacity to make medical decisions, or a court finding that whomever is petitioning for guardianship over your property or person deserves it. So it's very important, for all individuals who are under guardianship to know that they more than likely still retain their voting rights unless that separate proceeding has been held. And if there's any questions that may come up in determining if you still retain your voting rights, please feel free to reach out to me for more clarity on this concept. Now, finally, I want to wrap up, my portion of this discussion by, again, just reiterating the importance of the disability community voting block. Like I started my discussion with, 1 in 4 Marylanders is an enormous population of individuals whom, if mobilized, can clearly create a significant change in social and economic policy, both here in the state and nationally. Now, Maryland has, taken a significant step under Governor Wes Moore to include members of his cabinet who have disabilities and really try to provide more support for the disability community in general in an unprecedented form that we haven't seen, in all other 49 states. It's my understanding that Maryland is the only state in the union that features a cabinet position for a disability or a member of this disability community. And I find that, pretty amazing. But obviously, it highlights how far we've come and where we still need to push towards. So, like I mentioned before, there is nobody, truly nobody better to speak to the concerns of everyday Americans than individuals with a disability, because they have the foremost understanding of how healthcare, education, and social support systems operate and are intertwined in our state and country. So again, please, please, please make your voices heard, acknowledge, that your voting block is significant and can cause significant impact and progress and positive change. And, finally, please reach out to Disability Rights Maryland if you ever have any issues when trying to access the polls. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff. And thank you all for letting me share this information with you today.
All right. Thank you, Braden. I appreciate you. We appreciate you being here, and also just what you're doing in this area and in all the advocacy work that DRM is engaged in. I'd like to ask both of you, could you put contact information in the chat if anybody wants to get in touch with you with questions afterward? Or if anybody's listening to the recording and wants to get in touch with you. Thank you. Okay, now, next up is somebody that I have been listening to and reading material from for a while now, because I happen to be involved on a volunteer level with the organization that he works for. So I get emails from him where he's telling me to contact my congressman, and I hear reports from him and the team that he works alongside during the National Federation of the Blind's National Convention. And now I have the honor of being able to return the favor and say, hey, I'm helping to facilitate this event. You want to come be a part of it. And thankfully, he accepted that invitation. And that is Jeff Kaloc, who is a government affairs specialist for the National Federation of the Blind. And here's what he says about himself. My name is Jeff Kaloc, and I'm a government affairs specialist with the advocacy and policy team at the National Federation of the Blind. In my current role, I handle voting, tax, appropriation, and website accessibility matters, as well as work with our National Association of Blind Merchants to promote and support blind entrepreneurs. A little background about me. I am a native of Baltimore, graduated from Towson University with a BS in political science. After graduation, I began my career on Capitol Hill, where I interned for Congressman Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico's 3rd District and Congresswoman Donna F. Edwards of Maryland's 4th District. While completing my internship with Congresswoman Edwards, I was offered a staff position. I started off in the district office handling constituent inquiries and then transitioned to her Capitol Hill office where I handled legislative matters as a legislative assistant. So now he is working with NFB and helping blind people and others with disabilities on voting accessibility. So with that perspective, Jeff, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for having me participate in this today. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. And I want to applaud Braden too. That was a great portion that you provided with all of the details about the history of voting and where we are today with that. So thank you so much. As Braden had mentioned, each polling, the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, each polling place is required to have a ballot marking device present. Now, when you go in, there's 2 ways you could go about voting in Maryland. Either you could go in person, where you would use one of these ballot marking devices, or you can vote remotely, where you would use what we call electronic ballot return. And I'll summarize that real quick, and then we'll get into the details of that a little bit later. But essentially, what you would do is you would go onto a particular site provided by the state and fill out your ballot through whatever accessible means that you have, whether whatever assistive technology you prefer. And then right after you're complete with that, you can mark your ballot. You are required to print it and then mail it to the Board of Elections. But we'll go into the first portion of in-person voting with ballot marking devices. And as previously mentioned, the federal law requires that for each federal election, there to be one of these in a polling place. Now, there was a settlement with the state of Maryland where voters with disabilities and voters without disabilities are given the option to use ballot marking devices. And that's important. I'll tell you why that's critical. So oftentimes when a person enters the polling place and they say, I like to use the ballot marking device, these machines are sometimes stored in the back, not set up from the beginning of the election day, and kind of ignored until someone requests them. And that's not part of the law. Especially in Maryland with the settlement, everyone is to be offered a ballot marking device. So we prefer that they be, when you enter a polling place and you say, I like to use a ballot marking device, they should have it ready and operational for you to use. So that being said, from the beginning of election day until the end of election day, these devices need to be operational because it does take some time to get them started. So they should be up and running by the time you enter the polling place. Now, having people with disabilities and without disabilities using the device is an advantage because the more these devices are used, the better poll workers will be familiar with their settings and their usage. If it's a concept of only when someone with a disability may come in to use them, that might not be as frequent in different particular polling places or different precincts. So having more people use them allows the poll workers to gain a familiarity with these. Oftentimes, poll workers will get training on these devices months before the election, sometimes even in the early months of summer. So then November rolls around and we have a general election, and they're The last time they used it was probably in the primary, which is typically in Maryland in the spring, or whenever they had their training in the early summer, or even late summer. That builds enough time where they may not remember everything that the machine can do and how it operates. So having this machine used more frequently helps with that process. Um, when you the machine that Maryland uses is the ES&S Express Vote. Um, this has been the machine that they've used for the past several elections. Um, this ballot marking device has a control panel that you can operate actually as Braille on the device as well, so you could read what the control settings are. And then as you go through each screen, it'll read to you or provide an audio output of the different candidates. It'll also be on the screen. You can adjust the font if you like to have it in large print. You can adjust the contrast if you like to have it in, a black background or a white background or whatever, whichever you prefer. Um, and then also, if you are concerned that you don't want anyone seeing who you're voting for and you're just going to use the audio output, you can have a blank screen where you'll just be using the audio output to navigate you through each particular election. Now, I will mention for both voters with disabilities and voters without disabilities, the ballot marking device has many advantages. For voters without disabilities, um, and for voters with disabilities, what the ballot marking device provides you with is it will not allow you to overvote or it will notify you when you haven't selected enough candidates for the particular position that you're voting for. So let's say in Maryland, oftentimes you can vote for more than one uh, delegate at a time. Some particular districts will allow you to have up to 3 delegates that you can vote for. So let's say, there's 10 of them that are listed and they want you to vote for 3 of the 10. Um, you can go through that list, and let's say you accidentally select 4, it won't allow you to do that. It will say, you selected too many. You have to deselect one in order to select the one that you're trying to click on. And the same thing, if you only select on one, it'll notify you, hey, you still have 2 more that you can choose, depending on which precinct you're in or jurisdiction you're in. Sometimes there are only 2, but with that particular elected position, there's typically more than one. So this comes in handy with the ballot marking device notifying people, because most people, especially if it's their first time voting, they just think it's one position, one vote. President, you only get one selection for president. Same thing with U.S. Senator and member of Congress. But when it gets to some of these other selections, especially when it comes to judges or lower level offices that your county may have for you, you can oftentimes vote for more than one selection. So that's a benefit of the ballot marking device. Another benefit is it prevents stray marks. And what I mean by this, if you were to vote on a hand-marked paper ballot, if you were to use your pen and just tap a box for a particular candidate, you could there's an argument that they use with stray marks saying that you actually selected that box or that particular candidate. So you could overvote and then your vote would be discarded for that particular candidate or a particular position that you're voting for. So with ballot marking devices, that is not a possibility. You can only select the exact amount of candidates that are provided for that particular position or elected official. So that's some of the benefits of a ballot marking device. Oftentimes, and research has shown this time and time again, whether it's voters with disabilities using or voters without disabilities, most voters without disabilities will choose the line that has less people in it. So if there are a lot of people in line for a hand-marked paper ballot, but there's no one in line for a ballot marking device, they'll use the ballot marking device. And as I mentioned before, this is helpful as it helps more poll workers get familiar with the device. Another concept that it helps with is the ES&S Express Vote prints a ballot that is in different size than the hand-marked paper ballot. And the reason why this could be problematic is, let's say you're the only person with a disability that wants to use that device in your precinct. This doesn't provide you with a secrecy of a ballot, because as they're tabulating votes later, they're going to have one ballot that is in different size. They're usually a thinner ballot than the hand-marked paper ballots. So as someone's looking at the ballot to tabulate it, they could see, oh, Jeff voted for President so-and-so, and then they voted for this for senator, and then they voted, you know, and they could tell who you voted for. Whereas if there's more people voting with or without disabilities, it's going to add more volume to those particular ballots. So then they can't determine, hey, we got, 50 or 100 or whatever the number may be. It's going to add to the number. So it's not a few that is being used by that particular device. And that's why and that was the main reason for the settlement. Um, or one of the main reasons, I should say, for the settlement in the state of Maryland to allow voters without disabilities, you have to offer them the opportunity to use the ballot marking device because it's going to provide a secrecy for the ballot for folks that use the ballot marking device. So that's imperative too when it comes to in-person voting. And the the machine will print out a ballot and then you tabulate and then your vote will be counted. Now, that's in-person voting. Um, my recommendation is when you're going to vote, whether it's early voting or election day, contact your polling place. Let them know that you're going to be stopping by. Be like, hey, I'm going to be voting this. If it's early voting in October, if it's election day in November, and tell them, I expect to be using the ballot marking device. I used it last year. If you had any difficulties with poll workers, let them know. Be like, I wasn't last year the machine wasn't set up when I got into the polling place, and the poll worker wasn't very familiar with how the machine operated. I'm looking for a better experience this time around. So please have the machines operated. Please make sure that the poll workers are addressed. And this is federal law that they need to have these machines operated and that the poll workers need to be trained on them. So don't think that you're asking for some special privilege. You're just asking them to comply with the law. Um, so with that being said, that's my recommendation is that you call ahead of time and let them know that you're coming in. So there really is no excuse on their part. One, it's already federal law, so they should be abiding by it. But two, you can work with them to say, look, this is the experience I had last time. I really don't want to have that same experience next time. Could you please make sure that that's not replicated? So we'll go next into the other portion, which is electronic ballot delivery, which is permitted in Maryland. Um, so with voters with disabilities, how this works is you go to um, the site that they allow you to go to the vote, and it will allow you to use you could use it on your desktop at home, your laptop. So you can hook up your assistive technology, whether you use a refreshable braille display, if you use JAWS, whatever it may be that you're comfortable with. You can use at the comfort of your home and being able to uh, go through the selections just like you would with a ballot marking device one by one. This is a benefit because obviously there's no lines. You don't have to worry about, you can really take your time. So I know sometimes we'll have different questions that are being asked about, charter amendments and whatnot, depending on what jurisdiction you're living in. So this gives you more time to kind of contemplate. And you don't feel as pressured as when you're in the polling place. You have people in line behind you, perhaps. So this gives you that flexibility and freedom to vote in that manner, and then also use your own assistive technology. And then once you go through the selections, it'll ask you to print out the ballot and sign it. Now, we at the National Federation of the Blind wouldn't prefer this because that is not exactly accessible. We would prefer that, for an electronic signature and that you wouldn't have to print out the ballot. Many blind people don't own printers. It's not a need to. Um, and also having to mail the ballot back. So, we're working right now to try to get another system in place where this wouldn't be needed. But the system for this upcoming election, you would have to print out the ballot and then sign it and then mail it into the Board of Elections. But again, it's still a good concept in the fact that it allows you the flexibility to vote from your own home. This is becoming a more and more common concept across the United States ever since COVID. More and more states are adopting this practice because they understand the importance of it. Not just pandemics are a reason to have this, also natural disasters. Here in Maryland, we haven't, knock on wood, haven't had to experience it this year, but last year we had those forest fires come down from Canada. Heaven forbid if they came down during the election time and you didn't want to jeopardize your health by leaving your home and going out into, um, air quality that's not intended for humans to be going out into, and it's not very healthy. It would provide you that opportunity to vote from home. So natural disasters, this would be a good use for it as well. If you felt like you didn't have to go to the polling place for that. But those are the two methods of voting in Maryland, with the ES&S express vote and then also the electronic ballot delivery system. Again, we are trying to work to get electronic ballot return, where you could return it electronically in Maryland, but that's not here yet. But we're hoping to have that in the future. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. And if anyone has any questions, but I'll kick it over to Chris first, to see if he had any comments that he wanted to add before we go to the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I was about to respond to somebody in the chat as you were kicking it back to me. So I will go ahead and just respond to it orally. First of all, the person who sent that message in the chat first asked if we're sending out a copy of the recording. It will be posted on our YouTube channel and to our blog. And we're now going to move into a time of Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute. If you would, just say your name at the beginning so we know who you are. And you can then just go ahead with your question or comment.
Hello, this is Chiffon. First
Hey.
of all, this was very, very enlightening. I mean, I've learned some things, and I've had experiences where the people at the voting office, because I usually go to the location, had no clue how to use the machine. You know, I just said, I'll just put me over there, I'll figure it out, and I did. But just a few questions. I wondered if, even though they have their training earlier, if they could have sort of like a manual or a cue card, or not a cue card, I'm sorry, a little file card that will tell them, like they could physically read, well, here's how you do this, here's how you do that, on the voting equipment for those who, in my case, blind with very low vision. I use Braille, and for anyone else that may have a disability. Like, because someone could come in there new and they have no clue how to use the machine, and then the people that work there have no clue. And I've had that a few times happen until I just figured it out.
Yeah. So are you asking that the voter would have this information to know how to navigate it, or just the poll worker? Or
No, the poll worker, because it's their responsibility to know. And even if they do forget, you know, because they've had the training months ago, at least have some type of notation, even if it's on a file card, you know, this is how you turn it on. These are the basics. And then the individual, specifically, I'm referring to those who are blind or low vision, who use JAWS or read Braille, at least give them the basics so they know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, they are provided with information of how the machines operate and how they function. The problem is,
Oh, okay, I never had that
if they're
experience.
learning that on election day, it's a little bit too late. So
Yeah.
that's where we prefer, no one wants to wait around while they try to learn on the fly of how to operate these machines. So
Right.
while it's good to have that information, and like you said, they could put it down and perhaps like a note card or something, and that's fine if they just need to, if they're just like, what are the steps? But what we really prefer is for them to, they're the experts on this. They're supposed to know how the machine operates, and they're trained in that. And the more people that use the
Have
machine,
not had an expert thus far in
no?
my
Okay.
experience. I can only go by my
That's
experience.
true.
That's it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well,
Agreed.
then I really would recommend, from my recommendation, is calling your polling place
Mhm.
beforehand and letting them know that, and saying like, look, my voting experience was not ideal last year. or 2 years ago, or 4 years, whenever you voted last,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
tell them that, look, the poll worker was not well informed of what the capabilities of the machine were. It took them a long time to understand it. If the machine wasn't set up from the beginning of the day, start off with that and say, like, I had to wait 10, 20 minutes for them to even get the machine started up. So whatever,
Okay.
anything that you ran into during election day last time, I highly recommend um, letting them know that you ran into this last year and you really don't want to replicate that going forward this year. And if they seem like they're not being attentive, say, I understand this is also federal law that these machines are operational for election day. Um, I mean, they're expected to have these devices up and running. I will note that the NFB is going to be doing a blind voter survey after this election, so it'll be taking place in November. And if you've had a bad experience or a good experience, whatever the experience is, we would love to hear about those. So anyone, and this is for everyone in the call right now or in the Zoom right now, if you get an experience that you want to share, we'd be more than happy to hear from that. If it's something that went if your rights were violated, we'll try to point you in the direction. What we could do is we can report it or at least give you the information to report it yourself to the Department of Justice, so that they can be aware of this. There have been states where the Department of Justice this very year has had to step in because ballot marking devices were not providing in polling places. Alaska is one of them that comes to mind,
Oh, wow.
where there was not, for their primary, there were not ballot marking devices provided in each polling place, and the Department of Justice had to step in and say, you are violating federal law, and had to take action on that. So that's as recent as a couple months ago, this had to take place. So we, of course, we don't want those instances to happen. We prefer that they never end up happening, but if they do happen, we want to make sure that folks are letting the right officials know of what's going on so that action can be taken to be corrected.
Oh, thank
This
you
is
so much. And oh, go ahead. Were you going to say something,
Yeah,
Chris,
this
or
is
someone else?
Chris following up on Shaffan's question. So I've had a similar experience, kind of mixed, depending on the polling place. Uh, being in mostly areas where there aren't a lot of blind voters in the polling places that I'm going to, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Uh, Sometimes I've been surprised at the knowledge that a poll worker has, and then I've moved and I've gone to another polling place, where in the last election cycle that I can remember anyway, I went to the polling place and I was surprised that, now I don't know if the thing was set up before I came in. What I do know is the guy didn't even know how to turn it on and had to get 2 or 3 other people to consult with him about it. So I hadn't thought about calling ahead. I guess I had kind of taken it for granted that they all would have been trained. Uh, but I guess my follow-up question then is, are they all trained, or are they all supposed to be trained? Is it just the kind of supervisors who are trained? And then also, when you say call ahead, are you who are we calling ahead to?
Yeah. So when I'll answer the latter portion first. So when you're calling ahead, call into your particular precinct.
Okay,
So wherever you're going to be voting, whether it's your local high school or church or
right.
library, wherever it may be taking place, um, call into there where they have the voting information um, for your particular polling location, and let them know. Um, all poll workers are supposed to be trained. Does that mean they are trained? We run into enough instances that I find it hard to believe that they're all trained. If they are, they're not retaining a lot of it. So sure, by federal law, they're supposed to be trained. But whether that's being whether that's sticking or whether that's being implemented at every polling place. I can't speak to that it is, but given that the information and the feedback that we receive, I would say it's not at every polling place. Um, One great way of having, and you kind of mentioned it, Chris, your previous polling place, maybe because you entered that polling location several times, they became familiar with the concept of the ballot marking device.
Yeah.
One thing that I advocate for more people with disabilities to do is become poll workers yourself, and educate the other poll workers of like, hey, I use the ballot marking device and I've used it X amount of times to vote, and this is how it's supposed to operate. And you yourself will get that training of how these devices work too,
Yeah.
because you'll be part of the of that team now that's working. So we really advocate um, for more blind people to become poll workers, or people with disabilities to become poll workers. And Braden, it seems like you're in agreement as well.
Yeah, I was gonna just jump in on that same point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Jeff. I do just agree. It's really, really important for individuals with disabilities themselves to become poll workers. That way they provide that firsthand experience, not only for themselves to understand the voting process more in depth, but it's just good for people to feel seen and supported, and see individuals that navigate similar experiences than them, also acting as poll workers. So that's really welcoming. That's really comforting for members of the disability community to see someone that shares those similarities with themselves, to be there and assisting with the election. And then I also wanted to jump in a little bit on what was shared earlier. Shafan, it would be great if you could reach out to me with some more details about your experience. I currently, in my role at DRM, I'm trying to work with the State Board of Elections to issue some more guidance to poll workers throughout the state on how to support with the accessible ballot marking device, how to support with guardianship issues, or basically provide just some extra review of the laws and the protections for individuals with disabilities prior to November. So I am in conversation with the State Board of Election. I would love to have some more input from you, Shafan, about where that occurred, and in what county or what polling location. That way I can share some of those details and concerns with the State Board of Election when the time comes.
Sure, I'll be glad to do that. Can I just send that to your email?
Yes, ma'am. That would be perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and then the other question I have is there like a website for this electronic voting?
So you would
Someone
have
was
to
mentioning
register.
that.
You would have to register to do that. So you have to go to the board of election and register to vote that way. And that way
Oh, even though
they
I'm registered to vote, I would have
yeah.
to go do
Yeah, because they would
Okay.
have to know that you prefer that way to vote this election. So you have to
Okay.
register so they know to provide you with that information. And then
Okay.
when you go through that, say you want to do it, um, you just select it, you want to do it remotely, and they'll provide you with that information to do so.
And do I need to let them know specifically, which it doesn't bother me, but let them know that I am a blind individual and I would need to make sure it's accessible with what I use?
So you don't have to do
Such
that because it should be accessible for everyone using it. Because voters with and without disabilities can use that particular site. So it should be accessible regardless whether you do or don't have a disability.
Okay. And you've never had anyone address, I'm speaking for those who are blind or very low vision, who use JAWS. You've never had anyone say the website was, a little funky, and, JAWS just did not communicate well, or
I haven't had any JAWS complaints yet with the accessibility of the
okay.
website that I've heard of. The main complaint is having to print the ballot and send it in by mail and signing it. That is
Yeah.
the main
Yeah.
complaint.
Yeah.
So the accessibility portion of the website, we haven't had any problems with that. At least to my knowledge, I haven't
Okay.
heard any, and many colleagues have used it too, and I haven't heard them
Right.
express any concerns with that. So it's mainly the printing and and signing portion and mailing.
yeah, I guess you got to have a trusted person to assist you with the signing part.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay. I appreciate
Okay.
y'all. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So any other questions? I saw a few questions and some messages in the chat from Ashley. So if you're able to unmute, Ashley, would you
Hello?
be able to just ask those questions? Yes.
Hello. You were able to hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, no, it was more of a comment. You already answered the recording one, the question. Let's see. Well, Chiffon asked one of my questions, which was if the poll workers were all trained, because I had a also similar experiences to her. When I went and at one of the locations when I went to I think regular voting day in the past, for I think uh different elections. I think it was President and then one was for like House of Reps or something. But they were better. I think they were better trained and had everything ready for me at that location. But when I went to early voting at the library, I've done that some years at a public library, they weren't as they didn't seem all familiar with it. And then they showed me, we went sighted guide, they showed me where the machine was. And then I could tell they were a little confused themselves. They didn't for example, they didn't hand me headphones. I had to ask for that. I said, this is an audio device and you'll need to turn it on so I can hear it. And I'm also low vision, so I was using the audio device rather than reading it um on the screen. So they kind of well, eventually had it ready. They kind of had to figure out what screen to use, and then they had to get the headphones and all that. Well, anyway, I just think that they didn't know what they were doing. It took us a while, and then it took me, another 15 minutes to vote by listening to all the options. So it took a while, which is too bad, but yeah, so basically I'm saying I had a similar experience to Chiffon, it sounds like. And yeah, and one time the machine wasn't, I forgot the problem, but it wasn't either working or they didn't have the audio. I think I couldn't hear it for some reason. So they ended up just reading it to me. Because I felt that way would be faster. I mean, they did have large print on the screen, but I thought that would be too slow for me to try to read it. So yeah, it was read to me, and then they had to enter in my um the options that I wanted. Anyway, but oh yeah, my question I think was so we have to print out the ballots, that's true. Whether you vote in person with a audio marking ballot machine or whether you vote out remotely, like in through the mail in this case. But I guess the question is there a way to have your ballot like more secretive? Like, can you turn it around or something, because it face down so it's not visible? Because here's the thing, at least at my polling places, they have you print out the ballot when you're done and take it over to a machine. So between walking from your place where you sat to the machine, I don't know if people can see it, and other people without disabilities don't really have to do that. They don't have to like walk across the room and then feed it into the machines because they're usually using paper ballots. And then I don't know where they put it, but I don't really see anyone else walking across the room. So I guess that was what I was wondering. Um, if there was a way to do it I feel pretty secure already, but I mean, if there was anything else to do, like I thought about folding the paper, but I didn't know whether that would affect the reading of it. So that's what I was like wondering. And as to making yourself anonymous, I I don't think there was anyone else visually impaired there, so if anyone did see it, I suspect it wouldn't really be an anonymous anyways. um because at least in my area, people with disabilities use those electronic auto mark machines. Everyone else doesn't, or generally does not. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Ashley, or
Oh,
Jeff, if you want to,
no, go ahead,
I'll
Braden.
go.
You go.
Yeah, Ashley, thanks for those comments. Thank you for sharing with us your experience. And I'm sorry that it,
hopefully that makes sense to
hasn't
some
been the
extent.
greatest. Yeah. So just starting with the anonymity of the ballot, I know Jeff had touched on it earlier. It is very important, that everyone uses the accessible ballot marking device if they would like to, and just more often than not, it's better to use it, if it's available, for regardless of whether you have a disability or not. That way, it can print out as many of those ballots as possible, and it can be harder, to discern who's filling out which ballot, and if those ballots that are coming out are all for members of the disability community, or if they're from all voters in general. So that would definitely help with the anonymity, and something that here at DRM we're trying to push in every presentation that we give, and every outreach event, just to let community members know that everyone has access to that and everyone should make use of it. And like Jeff touched on earlier, that would also support with those
Right.
poll workers getting more of an understanding for how to support people like yourself with using that machine. Now, speaking to having to carry the ballot across the room, that's the first time I've heard of an instance of that. But I'm new to the work in general, and I'm really trying to get out to the community to hear more concerns. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I'll definitely relay that concern to the State Board of Elections, and see if there's some way that they could set up polling locations to maybe feature that scanner right next to the accessible ballot marking device, to try to avoid something like that. So it's definitely something I can include in my conversations with them moving forward. Yeah, if Jeff has anything extra to add, please.
Sure. So at least my experience, I vote in Anne Arundel County, Maryland.
Oh, see,
so
I'm not in your state, but I'd imagine it would be similar because I think you'll have the automark there too.
we have the ESNS Express vote.
Oh,
So
I think we have a little of both. Anyway,
okay.
yeah, I'm in like
What
the
they
neighborhood
typically
state.
do, because I like to use the ballot marking device, so I always go in person. I think I only voted remotely once, and
Yeah, ditto.
that
I
might have
only
been
voted once with assistance during COVID remotely because
right.
obviously I can't read read the paper, so a scribe assisted me. Yeah. Anyways.
So with in Maryland, and I know for Anne Arundel County, they put it in a manila folder, so you have um you have your printed out ballot, and then you stick it into a manila folder, and then you do walk it across the room, and they ask you to insert it into the machine that you're speaking of, to tabulate it. And that's for voters that use the ballot marking device, and that's also for voters who use the hand marked paper ballots. So they all have the same manila folder that they kind of cover it up with to conceal who they voted for until they get to the particular place. Usually there's a poll worker standing there, and they just take it from you, insert into the machine, and then take the manila folder and kind of stack them up, and reuse them. So that's how it works in
Oh.
Anne Arundel County, and most of the counties in Maryland, from my experiences. I voted in several of them through the course
They
of my life.
work in Baltimore City as well, just from my
Yeah,
experience, what you were describing.
Yeah, Baltimore City, I know, does it the same way. I haven't voted in Baltimore County in particular, but I assume that's a Maryland practice, how they use the manila folder, because I believe it's a state that implements that. I know when I was in Montgomery County for a short period of time, they did the same thing. I'm not sure, which state are you calling? Are you from Massachusetts by chance, or do you vote in Massachusetts, or?
No, my brother lives there. I live
Okay.
in the neighboring state.
Okay. Because I know they still use the auto mark. So I was trying to think of the states that still use the auto mark. I know Massachusetts is one of them.
Yeah, some of the elections they gave me the manila folder. Now that you mentioned it, I do remember. But I don't think that was all of the elections. I'm pretty sure that it varied. But what happened, either way was obviously if I was given the envelope, I used it. But the poll worker would say you're done voting, and I'll be like, yes, this is my ballot. And then they would assist me over to the machine and help me feed it into the machine from there. And yeah, and so you're right, there is a poll worker around the machine as well to help anybody. Anyway, I felt comfortable that everyone was, respecting my privacy, but I'm not sure. I don't know what happened afterward because I wasn't there, when they were counted. But I
Sure.
was just curious, like, yeah, what we could do for privacy. And I was just curious, how would you, one more thing is, how would other people use those machines when, when because wouldn't they be like not available? Because at least in where I am, there's like I think 2 or 3 electronic machines available only. And I think the rest are hand marked.
Yeah. So, I mean, just like anything else, when you go to polling
Yeah.
places, whether there's a line or not, in Maryland, they have to offer you both options. So they say, would you
Oh,
prefer to
okay.
vote with a hand marked paper ballot, or would you prefer a ballot marking device?
I see.
And then they have separate lines for the two ways you would vote. So
Okay.
typically what happens if, if a voter without a disability enters the polling place, 9 out of 10 times they're going to go to the shortest line.
Oh,
So if there's
right.
a
I remember
line
you
for the
saying
hand
that.
marked paper ballots, but there is no line for the ballot marking devices, they'll say, yeah, I'll take that way, and they'll vote through the ballot marking device and select their options and print it out, and then um, and go through it that way. So, most voters just want to find a way to vote the quickest. They want to get in and out. That's kind of that's kind of life in general. People, they don't want to hang around the polling place too long. They want to get in.
Right.
Usually, sometimes they're doing it on their lunch break, or they're doing it before they go to work, or even before they go home. So they're just trying to find a way to vote, have their ballot counted, and move on for the rest of the day. So, um, having that option, or having the state offer, the poll workers offer both options,
Okay.
allows more usage for the ballot marking devices.
Oh, good point. I don't know if it's here, but I could ask and find out whether it's supposed to be optional for everyone. I don't really know.
It was through a Maryland settlement, so I don't know. It depends on what state you're in. I don't know if they have a settlement there too. But I
Oh,
know in
I can
Maryland for
let
sure
you.
there was.
Yeah, I can let you know after the meeting since we're
Okay.
on recording. But yeah, I'm nearby. And last thing is, do the poll workers have any training and being confidential if you do end up having to get assistance from them, which is what happened to me when the ballot device wasn't working right, or they couldn't get it to work.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, all poll workers are like Jeff had mentioned earlier, they're supposed to be trained to be able to provide you with that assistance. All
Okay.
of that assistance is supposed to be, confidential,
Confidential.
in both the support that they provide and obviously the way in which you decide on your ballot. And that sort of brings up another point for me that I wanted to make earlier that I kind of forgot. And I've heard from, some community members trying to vote in the state of Maryland when requesting to use that accessible ballot marking device. Some poll workers at times have asked, why, or asked for some proof to show a need to use that device.
Yes, I had that problem. Yeah.
And in the state of Maryland, at least, I know for a fact that that's not, they're not supposed to ask for any proof. There is no proof required to use that machine. It's there for everyone without, like I said, without having to show any proof. All you have to do is request it. And poll workers are, obviously,
Oh.
if it's available, they're required to support you in using that. No questions asked, full stop. So, unless there's someone else, already using the machine, maybe, and they would let you know that, you'd have to wait in a line to use it. Other than that, there's really no no barrier that's supposed to come up, no question following your request, all of that sort of stigma is not supposed to be there. So I just thought that was important to bring up as well.
That's a really good point. Thank you for telling us. I guess that should be nationwide. Are you saying that's nationwide? They shouldn't ask questions? Or are you speaking only for Maryland?
I need to confirm that it's nationwide, but I know for certain in the state of Maryland that there's no that poll workers are not supposed to ask, for any proof or a reason why to use that accessible ballot marking device.
Oh, okay. Well, that's nice to know for those who are in Maryland. It wasn't a problem after I explained my preference, but yeah, they did ask me once or twice. They said, well, why can't we assist you? It'll be faster. Because I know that they had lines, and I understand where they were coming from. They were like, if we just read it to you, or your sighted guy that brought you here, that gave you a ride, brought it here, can they just read it to you? And I'm like, stood my ground. I said, could you please set it up so I can vote independently?
Yeah, and
And
that's
then
great that
I
you did
told
that,
them that I'm
Ashley.
visually impaired, low vision. And then I had a cane with me, so they should know that's my proof right there that I'm disabled.
Yeah.
Anyways,
And I'm glad you stood your
thank
ground on
you.
that, Ashley, because that's important. They do not have the right to tell you that you have to sacrifice to have an independent and private ballot.
Right,
So
exactly. I wanted a private ballot.
you can affirm your stance on that and say, no, I like to use the ballot marking device. I do not want to, I don't want to share my vote with anyone here. I want to vote privately and independently. So please, if the ballot marking device, please just, take me to where it's at. Yeah, that's a violation of federal law. That's for every state.
Oh, really?
There's no state that can tell you we don't have it set up or we don't have it ready when you prefer. It'd be quicker for us for you to vote this way. Well,
I've heard both.
that's not an excuse for them. Those machines in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, they all need to be set up and ready to be used. And if a person with a disability wants to use them, they cannot tell you no.
Wow.
And if they do, you can affirm this is my federal right to use that machine. If they really give you pushback, you say this is my federal right to use that machine, and I prefer to vote privately and independently. If for whatever reason they come back to you and say, I don't know, the machine's broken or it's not here or whatever, you can file a complaint with the Department of Justice.
Oh,
And then let them be aware that this has been a problem. So
wow.
that's a federal law.
And that's good. I mean, that was all my questions, but I would just say that from there, I, I like your advice of filing complaints so things can get resolved. But the problem I would have is, well, if it happens again, I'll just talk to you all offline about this. But my concern would be, how would you prove it? This is a verbal conversation that took 2 minutes at the most. So I guess that would be the issue there. If you complained, or I don't think I'd have proof. It'd be like he said, she said kind of thing.
Well,
Thank you, though.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. Does anybody else have any questions? We're a little over time, but I'll make a last call for questions or comments. Okay, well, I want to just say again how much I appreciate both Jeff and Braden for being here and for all the work that you're doing. Thank you all for the questions and comments that you asked and for your feedback. For those who weren't able to join us, or for whoever were only there for only part of this call, it was recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel and on our blog. So follow us on Facebook, the Image Center for People with Disabilities. You can follow us on Instagram too. So you can go to our website, imagemd.org. If you go to our blog, you can see our weekly posts on Mondays, one of which in a couple weeks will be a recap of this event. So Jeff, Braden, everybody, thank you again. And everybody get out to the polls this November, and let's do it in an accessible way. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.